The phone slipped from my trembling fingers as I stood in the hospital corridor, staring at the white walls that seemed to close in around me. My husband Marcus was dead. The semi-truck had crushed his pickup on Highway 95, while our 8-year-old daughter Emma fought for her life 3 floors above me in the pediatric intensive care unit. I needed my parents. I needed someone to hold me while my world shattered into a million pieces. So I called them, expecting comfort, expecting love, expecting them to drop everything and rush to my side. Instead, my mother's voice cut through my grief like a knife. They couldn't leave Tyler's 30th birthday party at the country club. I pressed the phone against my ear, trying to block out the steady beeping of machines and the shuffle of nurses' feet on polished linoleum. The background noise from my parents' end told a different story entirely. Laughter echoed through the speaker glasses, clinked together in celebration, and a live band played jazz music that seemed to mock my devastation. "Mom, please listen to me," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "Marcus didn't survive the crash. The doctors said the impact was too severe. His chest was crushed and he lost too much blood before the paramedics could reach him." Carol's response came between what sounded like bites of appetizers. "Oh, honey, that's terrible, but we really can't leave right now. Do you have any idea how much we spent on this party? The ballroom rental alone cost us $3,000, and we hired the premier catering service in the county." My knees buckled slightly as I leaned against the wall for support. Through the window, I could see other families huddled together in waiting rooms, holding each other through their own crises. Their presence made my isolation feel even more profound. "Emma is in a coma, Mom. She has swelling on her brain, and the neurologist won't know the extent of the damage until she wakes up. If she wakes up." My voice cracked on those last words. The music grew louder on their end, and I heard my father Robert's voice boom in the background, telling someone about the imported champagne they'd selected for the toast. When my mother handed him the phone, his tone carried the same dismissive quality that had defined my childhood. "Jean, you're 32 years old. You can handle this situation like an adult. We've been planning Tyler's celebration for 6 months and half the town is here. The mayor showed up for crying out loud. We'll drive down next week when things settle down and we can actually be helpful." Before I could respond, I heard my brother Tyler's voice demanding the phone. His words hit me like a physical blow. Sis, stop being so dramatic. People die in car accidents every single day. You're acting like this is the end of the world or something. Mom and Dad have obligations here, and frankly, there's nothing they can do at a hospital anyway. Handle your business and call us when you have actual news to report." The line went dead, leaving me standing alone in a corridor that suddenly felt colder than I'd ever imagined possible. Around me, life continued as if nothing had changed, but my universe had just revealed a truth I'd spent years avoiding. When I needed them most, my family had chosen a party over my pain. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of antiseptic smells, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of medical equipment keeping my daughter alive. Emma lay motionless in her hospital bed, surrounded by monitors that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every tiny sign that she might return to me. Tubes snaked from her small body to machines that looked impossibly complex, and her face was barely visible beneath the bandages covering her head injury. I hadn't left the hospital since the accident. The vinyl chair next to Emma's bed had become my entire world, and I survived on coffee from vending machines and whatever food kind nurses brought me when they noticed I wasn't eating. My clothes were the same ones I'd thrown on when the call came that Tuesday evening, and I caught glimpses of myself in bathroom mirrors looking like a ghost of the person I used to be. Patricia Gonzalez, the hospital social worker, knocked gently on the doorframe before entering Emma's room. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her presence had become one of the few comforts in this nightmare. "Jean, I brought you a sandwich from the cafeteria downstairs," she said softly, setting a wrapped turkey sandwich on the bedside table. "Have you heard anything from your family?" I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. Patricia had been checking on me regularly since learning that I was completely alone during this crisis. She'd offered to help me contact relatives or friends, but I'd explained that my parents were my only immediate family in the state, and they were busy with other commitments. "What about your husband's family?" Patricia asked, settling into the second chair that someone had brought in for visitors. Marcus was an only child, and his parents died in a house fire when he was in college. His work crew has been incredible, though. They've been handling the funeral arrangements since I can't leave Emma's side. As if summoned by our conversation, 3 men in work boots and faded jeans appeared in the doorway. Jake Morrison, Marcus's foreman, held his baseball cap in weathered hands, while his crew members Danny Rodriguez and Steve Parker stood behind him with flowers and a card signed by everyone at Morrison Construction Company. "We don't want to intrude," Jake said quietly, "but we wanted you to know that everything's taken care of for Thursday. The church is reserved, the burial plot is ready, and Father McKenna agreed to perform the service. Even though Marcus wasn't a regular churchgoer, he said any man who worked as hard as Marcus to provide for his family deserved proper recognition." Danny stepped forward with an envelope. "We took up a collection to help with immediate expenses. It's not much, but it might cover groceries or utility bills while you're dealing with all this." I accepted their kindness with tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by the generosity of men who had known Marcus for only 2 years, but treated him like a brother. They stayed for 20 minutes, sharing stories about Marcus's sense of humor on job sites and his habit of showing Emma's school pictures to anyone who would look at them. After they left, Patricia observed quietly, "Those men care more about your family than your own relatives do." Her words struck me with painful clarity. I'd been making excuses for my parents' absence, telling myself they'd show up eventually, that they were just processing the shock in their own way. But sitting in that hospital room, surrounded by kindness from near strangers, while my own blood relatives celebrated elsewhere, I began to understand something fundamental about the nature of love and loyalty. Emma's monitors continued their steady rhythm, and I held her small hand while making silent promises about the life we'd build together when she recovered. Whatever that life looked like, I was learning that family wasn't always defined by genetics. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the sky itself was mourning Marcus's death. I stood in Emma's hospital room at 6 in the morning, wearing the only black dress I had with me, which Patricia had retrieved from my house, along with clean clothes and toiletries. Emma remained unconscious, her breathing steady, but her face still and pale against the white pillows. Dr. Harrison had assured me that Emma's vital signs were stable, and the nursing staff promised to call immediately if there was any change in her condition. Leaving her felt like abandoning her, but I couldn't let Marcus be buried without saying goodbye. The funeral home had arranged transportation for me, and as the car pulled up to St. Joseph's Catholic Church, I was amazed by the number of people gathered despite the early hour and steady rain. Marcus's co-workers formed an honor guard near the entrance, and neighbors from our subdivision filled the parking lot. Emma's third-grade teacher, Sarah Williams, stood near the church steps with other faculty members from Lincoln Elementary School. Inside the church, I was struck by how full it looked. The front rows that should have been occupied by immediate family remained conspicuously empty, marked by reserved signs that would never be claimed. Behind those vacant seats, however, every pew was filled with faces that had become familiar over the past few days. People who barely knew Marcus, but understood the importance of showing up for a grieving widow and motherless child. Father McKenna delivered a beautiful eulogy about a man he'd met only through the stories others told. He spoke about Marcus's dedication to his craft, his love for his family, and his habit of volunteering for weekend community projects despite working 60-hour weeks. The priest had clearly listened carefully to the construction crew's memories and transformed them into a tribute that captured Marcus's essence perfectly. When it came time for me to speak, I walked to the podium on unsteady legs, gripping a piece of paper with notes I'd scribbled during sleepless nights. Looking out at the gathered faces, I saw Jake Morrison in the front row with tears running down his weathered cheeks. Sarah Williams nodded encouragingly from the middle section, and even Mrs. Chen from the corner grocery store had closed her shop to attend. Marcus would be amazed by this turnout. I began, my voice echoing in the hushed sanctuary. He always said he was just a regular guy who showed up to work and came home to his family. But looking at all of you here today, I realize he was so much more than that. He was the kind of person who made everyone around him feel valued and respected. My voice broke as I continued. I wish Emma could be here to see how many people loved her daddy. I wish my parents and brother could be here to understand what we've lost and what we need to rebuild. But Marcus taught me that family isn't always about blood connections. Sometimes it's about people who choose to stand with you when everything falls apart. The rain intensified as we moved to the cemetery, and umbrellas bloomed like black flowers across the hillside. Jake, Danny, and Steve served as pallbearers, along with 3 neighbors from our street. They carried Marcus's casket with the same care and respect they'd shown him in life. At the graveside, I stood alone in the space traditionally reserved for immediate family, while our chosen family surrounded me with their presence and support. Father McKenna's final prayers mixed with the sound of rain on canvas as the funeral director's tent provided minimal shelter from the storm. As dirt fell on the casket, I felt a hand slip into mine. Sarah Williams had quietly moved to stand beside me, offering wordless comfort in my loneliest moment. Around us, grown men wept openly for a co-worker they'd respected, and neighbors I barely knew approached to share memories of Marcus helping with yard work or offering advice about home repairs. The cemetery director, a dignified man in his 60s named Harold Thompson, approached me as the service concluded. His expression conveyed something between sympathy and bewilderment. Mrs. Anderson, in 37 years of conducting funeral services, I have never witnessed such a stark absence of immediate family members at a young father's burial. The support from your community is extraordinary, but I feel compelled to express my concern about your relative's decision not to attend. His observation crystallized something I'd been struggling to accept. My parents hadn't just missed a funeral. They'd chosen to prioritize a celebration over saying goodbye to their son-in-law and supporting their daughter during the most difficult day of her life. The contrast between their absence and the presence of Marcus's work family painted a picture I could no longer ignore. As we left the cemetery, I rode back to the hospital with Sarah, who had offered to drive me so I could return to Emma immediately. Through rain-streaked windows, I watched the landscape blur past and realized that my understanding of family had fundamentally changed in the span of a week. 6 days after the accident, I was dozing fitfully in the chair beside Emma's bed when I heard a sound that made my heart leap. A small, confused whimper escaped from her lips, and her eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings. I shot upright, instantly alert, and pressed the nurse call button while leaning over her bed. "Emma, baby, can you hear me? It's Mommy." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and cloudy, but definitely open. Dr. Harrison arrived within minutes, followed by 2 nurses who began checking her responses and noting readings from various monitors. Emma's gaze wandered around the room without recognition, and when she tried to speak, only confused mumbles emerged. "This is exactly what we hoped to see," Dr. Harrison explained while examining Emma's pupils with a small flashlight. "She's responding to stimuli, her motor functions appear intact, and her brain activity shows significant improvement from yesterday's scans." Over the next few hours, Emma's awareness gradually increased, but her confusion deepened as she began asking questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Her memory seemed fragmented, with clear recollections of some events and complete blanks where others should be. Mommy, why does my head hurt so much? She asked, reaching up to touch the bandages covering her stitches. And why are we in a hospital? Did I get sick? I took her small hand in mine, trying to find age-appropriate words for an incomprehensible tragedy. You and Daddy were in a car accident, sweetheart. A big truck hit your car and you got hurt. That's why you're here getting better. Emma's face scrunched up in concentration as she processed this information. Where's Daddy? Is he in a different room getting better too? The question I'd been dreading hit me like a physical blow. Emma had no memory of the accident itself, which Dr. Harrison explained was common with head injuries. Her last clear memory was stopping for ice cream on their way home from her soccer practice, laughing with Marcus about which flavor she should choose. Daddy got hurt worse than you did, baby, I said, carefully stroking her hair around the bandaged areas. He couldn't get better like you're getting better. The doctors tried really hard to help him, but his injuries were too serious. Emma's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. What do you mean he couldn't get better? Where is he? I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind dozens of times over the past week, but facing her innocent questions made every prepared explanation feel inadequate. Daddy died in the accident, Emma. He's not coming back, but he loved you so much, and he would be so proud of how brave you're being. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Emma stared at me with wide eyes that slowly filled with tears as the reality began to penetrate her injured mind. But I want to see him. Can we go visit him? We can't visit him anymore, sweetheart, but we can remember all the wonderful things about him and keep him in our hearts forever. Emma's crying began softly, but quickly escalated into heartbroken sobs that brought nurses running. Dr. Harrison administered a mild sedative to help calm her distress, explaining that emotional outbursts were normal during recovery from traumatic brain injuries. The medication helped Emma sleep, but I knew this was only the beginning of a much longer process of grief and healing. Later that evening, as Emma slept peacefully for the first time since waking up, Dr. Harrison sat down with me to discuss her prognosis and treatment plan. His news was both encouraging and daunting. The good news is that Emma's cognitive functions appear largely intact. He began reviewing her chart. Her speech is clear, her motor skills are responding well, and her memory issues seem confined to the immediate trauma rather than indicating widespread damage. What's the challenging news? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. She'll need extensive rehabilitation therapy, both physical and psychological. The head injury has affected her balance and coordination, which will require months of physical therapy to fully restore. More importantly, she'll need ongoing counseling to process both the trauma of the accident and the loss of her father. Dr. Harrison handed me several pamphlets about pediatric rehabilitation programs and grief counseling for children. The projected costs for Emma's recovery were staggering, easily reaching into 6 figures even with insurance coverage. As a part-time accountant at a small firm, my income barely covered our current expenses, let alone the medical bills that would soon arrive. That night, as I held Emma's hand and watched her sleep, I felt the weight of single parenthood settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Not only was I grieving the loss of my husband and best friend, but I was now solely responsible for guiding Emma through her recovery and building a new life from the wreckage of our old one. The hospital phone rang just after midnight, and I answered it expecting another check-in from the nursing station. Instead, I heard the voice of William Matthews, an insurance adjuster who apologized for calling so late but explained that he'd been trying to reach me for several days. Mrs. Anderson, I'm calling about the accident investigation. The preliminary reports indicate that the trucking company may bear significant liability for this collision. The driver had been on duty for 14 consecutive hours, which violates federal regulations, and the vehicle's brake system had multiple safety violations that should have taken it off the road weeks ago. William's words seemed to come from very far away as I processed their implications. What does that mean for us? It means there may be grounds for a substantial wrongful death settlement, particularly given your daughter's ongoing medical needs and your loss of household income. I'd recommend consulting with an attorney who specializes in these cases. As I hung up the phone, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time since the accident. Perhaps there would be a way to provide for Emma's recovery and our future without drowning in debt. But that small spark of optimism was immediately overshadowed by the bitter realization that any settlement, no matter how large, could never replace what we truly lost. 3 weeks after the accident, I sat across from David Chen, an attorney who specialized in wrongful death cases involving commercial vehicles. His office was located in a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city I'd never seen from this height. David was younger than I'd expected, probably in his late 30s, with an earnest demeanor and a briefcase full of documentation about the trucking company's negligence. "The evidence is overwhelming," David explained, spreading photographs and inspection reports across his polished conference table. Midwest Freight Solutions has a pattern of safety violations dating back 5 years. The truck that hit your husband had brake pads worn down to metal hydraulic fluid leaks and tire pressure readings that were dangerously low. He pulled out a thick folder containing the driver's logbook records. More damaging is the fact that Thomas Bradley, the driver, had been behind the wheel for 16 hours straight when the accident occurred. Federal law mandates rest periods after 11 hours of driving, but his company routinely pressures drivers to exceed those limits to meet delivery schedules. Emma had been released from the hospital the previous week and was staying with Patricia Gonzalez's sister Maria, a retired nurse who specialized in caring for children with head injuries. The arrangement was temporary, but it allowed me to handle the legal and financial aspects of our situation while Emma received professional care during her initial recovery phase. David continued reviewing the case details. Based on similar settlements in this jurisdiction, we're looking at compensation that could range from $1.2 million to $2 million. The exact amount will depend on several factors, including Emma's long-term medical prognosis and the extent of your financial losses. The numbers seemed surreal. Marcus and I had lived paycheck to paycheck, celebrating when we managed to save enough for a weekend camping trip or a new appliance. The possibility of financial security felt both overwhelming and somehow wrong, as if accepting money diminished the value of Marcus's life. "What happens next?" I asked, trying to focus on practical matters, rather than the emotional complexity of putting a price on my husband's death. Midwest Freight's insurance company will likely want to settle quickly to avoid a jury trial. These cases tend to generate significant publicity, and trucking companies prefer to handle them quietly. I expect we'll have preliminary offers within the next month. I returned to work part-time at Henderson Associates, the small accounting firm where I'd been employed for 6 years. My supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, had been incredibly understanding about my situation, allowing me to work flexible hours and handle some clients remotely so I could manage Emma's medical appointments and therapy sessions. Jennifer was a woman in her early 50s who had built the firm from nothing after her divorce 15 years earlier. She understood the challenges of single parenthood and had restructured my responsibilities to focus on clients who preferred evening or weekend consultations. "Take as much time as you need," Jennifer told me during our first meeting since my return. "We've redistributed your accounts temporarily, but they'll be waiting when you're ready to resume full-time work." The kindness of colleagues, neighbors, and even strangers continued to amaze me. Emma's teacher, Sarah, had organized a meal delivery schedule that ensured we had dinner every night for 3 weeks. Jake Morrison and his construction crew had spent a Saturday repairing our back deck without being asked, claiming that Marcus had mentioned it needed attention. Our next-door neighbors, Bill and Susan Martinez, took over our lawn care and offered to help with any household repairs. Meanwhile, my parents maintained their silence. No phone calls checking on Emma's recovery, no offers to help with medical expenses, No acknowledgement that they'd missed their son-in-law's funeral for a birthday party. Their absence had become so complete that I sometimes forgot other people had parents who actually functioned as sources of support during difficult times. Emma's progress was encouraging but slow. Physical therapy helped her regain full mobility, though she still experienced dizzy spells and headaches. The psychological counseling was more challenging as she struggled to understand why her father couldn't come back and why her grandparents had disappeared from her life entirely. "Oh, where did Grandma Carol and Grandpa Robert go?" Emma asked one evening as we practiced her homework assignments. "Don't they want to see me anymore?" These questions were the most difficult part of our new reality. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some adults prioritize their own convenience over family obligations? How do you help a child understand that love isn't always unconditional, even from people who are supposed to care about you most? They're dealing with daddy's death in their own way. I answered, hating myself for making excuses, but unwilling to destroy Emma's faith in family completely. Sometimes adults need time to figure out how to handle sad situations. As we settled into new routines, the possibility of the settlement became both a source of hope and anxiety. Financial security would solve our immediate problems and ensure Emma's medical needs were met. But I worried about the attention money might bring from people who had shown no interest in our welfare during our darkest hours. Those concerns proved prophetic sooner than I anticipated. 2 months after Marcus's funeral, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening while Emma and I were working on a jigsaw puzzle featuring horses in a meadow. Emma had developed an obsession with puzzles during her recovery, claiming that fitting the pieces together helped quiet the noise in her head from the injury. I almost didn't answer when I saw my mother's name on the caller ID. We hadn't spoken since that devastating hospital call, and her sudden contact felt ominous rather than welcome. "Jean, sweetie, how are you holding up?" Carol's voice carried an artificial sweetness that I remembered from my childhood when she wanted something but didn't want to ask directly. "I've been thinking about you and precious Emma constantly." "Oh, we're managing," I replied carefully, watching Emma concentrate on finding a piece that would complete the horse's mane. "Emma's recovery is going well, and we're adjusting to life without Marcus." "Oh, that's wonderful to hear. You know, your father and I have felt terrible about missing the funeral. Tyler's party ran so much longer than expected, and by the time we realized we could get away, it seemed too late to make the drive." The casual way she rewrote history took my breath away. They hadn't missed the funeral due to timing issues. They had actively chosen not to attend because leaving a party felt inconvenient. "We saw the article in last Sunday's newspaper," Carol continued, and suddenly her real motivation became crystal clear. "About that trucking company lawsuit and the potential settlement. It must be such a relief to know that Emma's future is secure." I hadn't realized the legal proceedings had attracted media attention, but apparently the local paper had published a story about Midwest Freight's safety violations and the pending litigation. The article had mentioned the possibility of a significant settlement without specifying amounts or timeline. "The legal process is complicated," I said, not wanting to provide details about something that remained uncertain. "Of course it is, honey. These things always are, but families should stick together during times like these. Your father and I were just saying how important it is for Emma to have her grandparents involved in making decisions about her future." Robert's voice came through the background, and I heard Carol pass him the phone. John, we need to have a serious conversation about this settlement situation," my father said without preamble. "Large sums of money require careful management, and you're going to need experienced guidance to make sure Emma's inheritance is properly protected." The word inheritance struck me as particularly offensive. This wasn't an inheritance from a deceased relative. This was compensation for the destruction of our family and Emma's ongoing medical needs. "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly, "but I have financial advisors and attorneys handling these matters." Oh, attorneys who don't know your family dynamics or understand your history, Robert countered. Emma is our granddaughter, and we have a responsibility to ensure her interests are protected. Some of these decisions affect more than just you and Emma. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't see but could definitely smell. They weren't calling out of concern for Emma's welfare or my ability to manage financial decisions. They were calling because money had entered the picture and they wanted to establish their claim to a portion of it. I should probably let you go, I said, suddenly eager to end this conversation. Emma needs help with her homework and we have therapy appointments tomorrow morning. Jean, wait, Carol interjected. We really should get together soon. It's been too long since we've seen Emma, and family relationships are so important for her emotional healing. Why don't we plan a visit for this weekend? After 2 months of complete silence, they wanted to schedule a visit exactly when settlement discussions were intensifying. The timing felt calculated rather than coincidental, and I found myself reluctant to subject Emma to people who had already demonstrated their capacity for abandonment. Let me think about it and call you back, I said, ending the conversation before they could pressure me further. Emma looked up from the puzzle with a curious expression. Was that Grandma and Grandpa? Are they finally coming to visit? Her hopeful tone broke my heart. Despite everything, she still believed in the goodness of people who had shown her none. I knelt beside her chair and helped her find the puzzle piece she'd been searching for. They might visit soon, I said carefully, but remember what we talked about with Dr. Rebecca about not expecting too much from people who haven't been around during difficult times. Emma nodded solemnly. At 8 years old, she was learning lessons about human nature that most children don't encounter until they're much older. The accident had stolen her father and forced her to grow up faster than any child should have to. But it was my own family's behavior that was teaching her that blood relationships don't guarantee loyalty or love. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to process my parents' sudden reemergence. Their timing couldn't have been more transparent, and their language revealed priorities that had nothing to do with Emma's well-being or my emotional needs. I realized I needed to prepare for the possibility that money would bring out the worst in people who had already shown me their true character during our greatest crisis. The follow-up call came 3 days later, this time from Tyler. I was helping Emma with her math homework when my phone buzzed with his number, and I debated whether to answer. Emma was struggling with multiplication tables, a skill that had been automatic before her head injury, but now required intense concentration and frequent breaks. Hey sis. Tyler's voice carried the same casual tone he'd used when calling me dramatic during Marcus's death announcement. I hope you don't mind me calling, but Mom and Dad are really worried about this whole settlement situation. Worried about what specifically? I asked, moving to the kitchen so Emma couldn't hear the conversation. About you making decisions that affect the whole family without consulting anyone. Look, I get that you're grieving and probably not thinking clearly about long-term consequences, but this money isn't just about you and Emma. His presumption stunned me into momentary silence. How exactly does Marcus's wrongful death settlement affect you, Tyler? Come on, John, don't be naive. Emma is part of this family, which means her inheritance impacts all of us. Mom and Dad have spent thousands of dollars on family gatherings over the years. Not to mention the emotional investment they've made in their grandchildren, they deserve some consideration in how this money gets distributed. The twisted logic of his argument would have been amusing if it wasn't so deeply offensive. According to Tyler's reasoning, hosting birthday parties and holiday dinners created some kind of financial claim on Emma's settlement funds. Tyler, this isn't family money. This is compensation for Marcus's death and Emma's medical expenses. It has nothing to do with anyone except Emma and me. That's where you're wrong. Tyler said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used since childhood when trying to assert dominance. I've been talking to some people who know about these things, and family members can have legitimate claims on settlements when children are involved, especially when there are questions about the surviving parent's ability to manage large amounts of money responsibly. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Tyler was suggesting that my parents could challenge my guardianship or my right to manage Emma's settlement if they felt I wasn't acting in her best interests. The idea that they would use legal tactics against their own daughter was both shocking and somehow perfectly consistent with their recent behavior. I think we need to have a family meeting, Tyler continued. Mom, Dad, and I have been discussing this situation, and we all agree that these decisions are too important to make without input from Emma's entire family. We're thinking this weekend would work well for everyone. You've been discussing my private legal matters without including me in the conversation. Don't get defensive, John. We're trying to help you avoid making mistakes that could hurt Emma in the long run. Some of these financial decisions are complicated, and you've never been great with money management anyway. Tyler's casual insult about my financial skills was particularly galling considering that I was a professional accountant who had managed our household budget successfully for years. But his comment revealed how they viewed me as someone too incompetent to handle significant financial responsibility without their guidance. I'm not agreeing to any family meetings about my personal business, I said firmly. If you want to maintain a relationship with Emma, you're welcome to visit and spend time with her, but her settlement is not a topic for family discussion. Actually, it is, Tyler replied, his tone hardening. Emma is our niece and granddaughter. We have legal rights regarding her welfare, and we're prepared to exercise those rights if necessary. The conversation ended with Tyler informing me that they would be driving down on Saturday morning for what he called a necessary family discussion about Emma's future. He didn't ask if the timing was convenient or if Emma was ready for visitors. He simply announced their intention to arrive and expected me to accommodate their demands. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, feeling like I'd just been ambushed by people who were supposed to love and support me. The idea that my own family would threaten legal action to gain access to money meant to provide for an orphaned child was so far beyond my understanding of normal family dynamics that I couldn't quite process it. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, having finished her homework without my help. Mommy, you look upset. Was Uncle Tyler being mean again? Her perceptiveness reminded me that children often understand adult dynamics better than we give them credit for. Emma had witnessed enough of my family's behavior to recognize Tyler's capacity for cruelty even at her young age. Uncle Tyler and your grandparents want to visit this weekend, I told her honestly. How do you feel about that? Emma considered the question seriously before answering. Will they be nice to us this time? Because if they're going to be mean like when Daddy died, maybe they shouldn't come. Her simple assessment captured the heart of the situation better than any legal or psychological analysis could. If my family couldn't treat us with kindness and respect during our most vulnerable time, what right did they have to insert themselves into our lives now that money was involved? I realized I needed to prepare for a confrontation that would likely determine the future of our family relationships. Whatever happened during their visit, I was determined to protect Emma from people who saw her settlement as their opportunity rather than her lifeline. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather for November, and I was helping Emma practice her physical therapy exercises in the living room when 3 cars pulled into our driveway simultaneously. Through the front window, I watched my parents emerge from Robert's luxury sedan while Tyler climbed out of his red pickup truck. The third vehicle was a silver BMW I didn't recognize, and my stomach dropped when a woman in an expensive business suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. Emma stopped mid-stretch and looked toward the window with apprehension. That's a lot of people, Mommy. Why did they bring someone we don't know? I helped Emma to her feet and smoothed down her hair, trying to project calm while my heart raced with anxiety. I'm not sure, sweetheart, but we'll find out together. The doorbell rang before I could reach it, and I opened the door to find my parents flanked by the unknown woman, while Tyler stood slightly behind them with a satisfied smirk on his face. Carol immediately pushed past me into the living room, her arms outstretched toward Emma. "There's my beautiful granddaughter. Oh, Emma, we've missed you so much. Look how much you've grown since we last saw you." Emma accepted Carol's embrace politely, but without enthusiasm, her eyes darting nervously between the adults crowding our small living room. The woman with the briefcase remained near the door, observing our interaction with professional detachment. "Jean, this is Sandra Williams," Tyler announced, gesturing toward the stranger. "She's an attorney who specializes in family law and children's rights. We thought it would be helpful to have professional guidance for our discussion today." My mouth went dry as I realized the full extent of their preparation. They hadn't come for a casual family visit or even an informal conversation about Emma's welfare. They had brought legal representation to what was essentially an ambush in my own home. "I wasn't aware we needed an attorney for a family conversation," I said, carefully conscious that Emma was listening to every word. Sandra Williams stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm here to ensure that everyone's interests are protected during what could be emotionally charged discussions about your daughter's financial future. Family disputes involving significant assets often benefit from professional mediation." Robert moved to our couch and sat down as if he owned the place, opening a folder filled with documents that he spread across our coffee table. "Jean, we need to discuss the settlement arrangements and how they affect Emma's long-term security. Sandra has helped us understand the legal framework for protecting children's interests when large inheritances are involved." I noticed that he kept using the word inheritance rather than settlement, as if Marcus had died peacefully of old age rather than being killed by a negligent trucking company. The semantic choice felt deliberate and insulting. "Emma, why don't you go play in your room while the adults talk?" Carol suggested, but Emma moved closer to me instead of obeying. "I want to stay with Mommy," Emma said quietly. "This is our house, and these people are making her worried." Tyler laughed dismissively. "She's got quite an attitude for a kid. Maybe that head injury affected her manners too." Emma's face flushed red, and I felt my protective instincts surge. "Tyler, that's completely inappropriate. Emma is recovering from a traumatic brain injury, and she's been through more pain than any child should have to endure. Which is exactly why we need professional oversight of her settlement funds," Sandra interjected smoothly. "Children who experience trauma are particularly vulnerable to poor financial decision-making by well-meaning but overwhelmed guardians." The implication that I might mismanage Emma's money due to grief or incompetence was so offensive that I struggled to respond calmly. These people had shown no interest in Emma's actual recovery or emotional needs, but they were deeply concerned about my ability to handle her financial assets. Carol pulled out her phone and showed Emma pictures from Tyler's birthday party, including shots of the elaborate decorations and expensive catering setup. "Look at all the fun we had. Emma, your uncle's party was absolutely magical. I'm so sorry you missed it." Emma studied the photos with confusion. "But that was when Daddy died, and I was sleeping in the hospital. Why were you having a party?" This innocent question hung in the air like an accusation, and I watched the adults' faces carefully. Robert cleared his throat and looked away while Tyler suddenly became very interested in the documents on the coffee table. Only Sandra maintained her professional composure, though I caught her glancing at my parents with what might have been disapproval. "Sometimes adults have commitments they can't change even when sad things happen," Carol explained weakly. "But we're here now, and that's what matters." Emma's 8-year-old logic cut through the adult rationalizations with brutal clarity. "But if your granddaughter was hurt and your daughter was sad, wouldn't you want to help them instead of going to a party?" The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Emma had asked the question that exposed the fundamental flaw in their character, and no amount of legal maneuvering or financial justification could answer it satisfactorily. Sandra Williams cleared her throat and opened her briefcase, apparently deciding to move forward despite the awkward exchange. Perhaps we should focus on the specific legal matters we're here to discuss. Sandra Williams spread several legal documents across our coffee table with the efficiency of someone accustomed to hostile family meetings. Emma remained pressed against my side, her small hand gripping mine tightly as she observed the adults who had invaded our living room with briefcases and ultimatums. Based on my review of the case circumstances, Sandra began, there are several legal precedents that establish grandparent rights in situations involving significant financial settlements for minor children. The court's primary concern is always the child's best interests, which includes ensuring proper oversight of inherited assets. Robert leaned forward eagerly. Exactly what we've been trying to explain to Jean. This isn't about us wanting money for ourselves. It's about making sure Emma's inheritance is managed by people with experience handling substantial financial responsibilities. Tyler pulled out his phone and opened a calculator app. I've been running some numbers based on what the newspaper article suggested about settlement amounts. Even at the conservative end, we're talking about enough money to completely change Emma's life trajectory. That kind of responsibility shouldn't fall entirely on someone who's never managed more than a household budget. His casual dismissal of my professional accounting credentials was both insulting and strategically calculated. By portraying me as financially naive, they were building a case for external oversight that would conveniently include their input on spending decisions. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Carol dabbed at her eyes with a tissue summoning tears that seemed more theatrical than genuine. We're proposing that Emma's settlement be managed by a family trust with multiple trustees. That way, major financial decisions would require consensus from people who truly care about her welfare. And who would these trustees be? I asked, though the question was rhetorical. Obviously, you would be the primary trustee, Sandra explained, but your parents would serve as co-trustees to provide additional oversight and ensure that spending decisions align with Emma's long-term interests. Tyler would serve as an alternate trustee in case anyone becomes unable to fulfill their duties. The audacity of their proposal was breathtaking. They wanted legal authority over money they had no right to claim, based on their supposed concern for a child they had abandoned during her greatest crisis. They were essentially demanding to be paid for the privilege of second-guessing my parenting and financial decisions. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said slowly. You want me to give you legal control over compensation for my husband's death and my daughter's injuries, even though you couldn't be bothered to visit her in the hospital or attend his funeral. Robert's face reddened with indignation. That's not fair, Jean. We explained about Tyler's party and our prior commitments. We can't change the past, but we can make sure Emma's future is properly secured. Prior commitments, I repeated, tasting the bitter words. Is that what you call choosing a birthday party over your daughter's worst nightmare? Tyler stood up abruptly, his patience apparently exhausted. Look, we get that you're still emotional about all this, but at some point, you need to accept that other people have lives and responsibilities too. The world doesn't stop because you have a crisis. Emma flinched at his harsh tone, and I felt my protective instincts override any remaining desire for family harmony. Other people's lives and responsibilities. Tyler, my husband was dead and my daughter was in a coma. If that doesn't qualify as a situation where family should drop everything to help, then what does... Carol resumed her crying, this time with more conviction. We've felt terrible about missing the funeral ever since it happened. The guilt has been eating us alive for months. That's why we need to make this right by ensuring Emma's inheritance is properly protected. Her settlement, I corrected firmly, It's not an inheritance, it's compensation for trauma and loss. Sandra Williams intervened before the argument could escalate further. These emotional issues aside, the legal reality is that significant settlements involving minor children often require court oversight anyway. Family trusts can actually provide more flexibility than court-appointed guardianship arrangements. She pulled out a thick document and placed it in front of me. I've prepared preliminary trust paperwork that would establish the framework we've discussed. Obviously, you'll want to review it with your own attorney before signing anything, but this gives you an idea of how the arrangement would function. I glanced at the papers without picking them up, noting that Tyler's name appeared prominently throughout the document as an alternate trustee with significant decision-making authority. My parents were listed as co-trustees with veto power over any expenditure exceeding $10,000. This document gives you more control over Emma's money than I would have, I observed. Major decisions would require your approval, even for things like medical expenses or educational costs. That's the point, Robert said matter-of-factly. Young people often make impulsive decisions with money, especially when they're dealing with grief and trauma. Having experienced oversight prevents costly mistakes. Emma had been listening to this entire exchange with growing confusion and distress. Finally, she spoke up in a small voice that silenced all the adult argument. Why do they want to take our money? We need it for my doctor visits and therapy, and Mommy works really hard to take care of me. The simple question from an 8-year-old cut through all the legal complexity and revealed the situation's true nature. My family wasn't proposing financial oversight for Emma's protection. They were attempting a legal money grab disguised as concern for her welfare. Sandra Williams looked uncomfortable for the first time since entering our home. Emma, nobody wants to take your money. We just want to make sure it's managed properly so it lasts your whole life. But why do you get to decide instead of Mommy? Emma asked with the logical persistence that head injury survivors often develop. She's my mom, and she takes good care of me. Tyler's patience finally snapped completely. Because your mom doesn't know anything about managing real money, kid. She's never had more than a few $1,000s at one time, and now she's going to be responsible for millions. People need help with that kind of responsibility. His condescending explanation to Emma was the final straw that broke my remaining composure. Standing up abruptly, I pointed toward our front door. I think this conversation is over. You can take your legal documents and your trust proposals and leave my house immediately. Sandra Williams began gathering her papers with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Anderson, I understand you're upset, but these arrangements are often inevitable when significant assets are involved. It might be easier to work with family members than to have the court impose external oversight. Are you threatening me? I asked directly. I'm explaining legal realities, Sandra replied smoothly, but I hope you'll consider our proposal carefully before making any final decisions. As they prepared to leave, Robert stood in our doorway and delivered what felt like a final ultimatum. Jean, we're trying to help you avoid a legal battle that nobody wants. But Emma's inheritance is too important to leave entirely in inexperienced hands. Think about what's really best for your daughter. After they left, Emma and I sat on our couch in stunned silence, surrounded by the emotional wreckage of a family confrontation that felt more like a business negotiation than a reunion. Emma leaned against me and asked the question that captured our new reality perfectly. Mommy, are we going to be okay? Because those people seemed really mean. I held her close and made a promise that I intended to keep no matter what legal battles lay ahead. Yes, sweetheart, we're gonna be more than okay, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you or take away what belongs to us. Monday morning found me sitting in David Chen's office at 8 o'clock sharp, clutching a folder full of documents and nursing my third cup of coffee since dawn. Emma was at school, having insisted she felt well enough to attend, despite the weekend's emotional upheaval. Her resilience continued to amaze me, but I worried about the long-term effects of exposing her to my family's toxic behavior. David listened carefully as I described Saturday's ambush, taking notes on a yellow legal pad and occasionally asking for clarification about specific threats or demands. His expression grew increasingly grim as I detailed Sandra Williams's trust proposal and my family's claims about grandparent rights. "This is more aggressive than I anticipated," David admitted when I finished my account. "Attempting to gain legal control over a wrongful death settlement by claiming inadequate guardianship is a serious accusation. They're essentially arguing that you're unfit to manage your own daughter's financial interests." He leaned back in his chair and studied the trust documents Sandra had left behind. The good news is that their legal theory is fundamentally flawed. Grandparents don't automatically have rights to control grandchildren's settlements, especially when the surviving parent is competent and present. The bad news is that they could still cause significant trouble through frivolous litigation. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would involve exactly the kind of expensive legal battles I couldn't afford. "They could petition the court for guardianship review, claiming that grief has impaired your judgment. They could file for grandparent visitation rights and use that as leverage to influence financial decisions. Most problematically, they could request that the settlement be placed under court supervision, pending a determination of Emma's best interests." David pulled out a fresh legal pad and began outlining a defense strategy. "The key is documentation. We need to create an irrefutable record of their abandonment during your family's crisis and contrast it with your competent handling of Emma's recovery and financial planning." Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive approach to gathering evidence that would demolish my family's claims about their concern for Emma's welfare. David's plan was thorough and methodical, focusing on establishing a timeline that would expose their true motivations. "First, we need hospital records showing visitor logs during Emma's stay," David explained. "These will prove that your parents never visited, despite knowing about her condition. We'll also need documentation from the funeral home showing their absence from Marcus's service." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken during those horrible days. I have pictures from the funeral showing the empty family section. The funeral director, Harold Thompson, commented specifically about their absence. "Perfect. We'll need a written statement from him about that conversation. Also, get me contact information for everyone who did show up to support you. Hospital staff, Marcus's co-workers, neighbors, teachers. We want to demonstrate that you built a strong support network that doesn't include your biological family." David continued building our evidence list. "Phone records will be crucial. We need documentation of when you called to inform them about the accident and their response. Do you remember the specific date and time?" "Tuesday, October 15th at approximately 9:45 p.m., I replied immediately. "I'll never forget that conversation." "Good. We'll subpoena their phone records to verify the timeline and cross-reference it with social media posts from Tyler's birthday party. If they were posting party pictures while refusing to help during your emergency, that creates a powerful contrast." I spent the rest of the week gathering documentation that painted a devastating picture of my family's priorities and character. Emma's teacher, Sarah Williams, provided a detailed statement about my dedication to Emma's recovery and education. Dr. Harrison wrote a letter praising my advocacy for Emma's medical care and my responsible approach to treatment decisions. Jake Morrison and his construction crew submitted a group statement describing their support during Marcus's funeral and their ongoing assistance with household maintenance. They emphasized that they had stepped into roles traditionally filled by family members because my actual relatives were unavailable. Patricia Gonzalez, the hospital social worker, provided perhaps the most damning evidence in the form of her detailed notes from our interactions during Emma's hospitalization. Her records showed multiple offers to help me contact family members and my repeated explanations that they were unavailable due to other commitments. Mrs. Anderson exhibited remarkable strength and competence throughout her daughter's medical crisis. Patricia wrote in her formal statement, she made appropriate medical decisions, advocated effectively for her child's needs, and demonstrated excellent judgment under extreme stress. At no time did she display any behavior that would suggest impaired decision-making capacity. Most importantly, I located the newspaper article that had apparently triggered my family's sudden interest in our situation. The article, published in the Sunday edition 2 weeks earlier, featured a headline reading, "Local trucking company faces massive settlement over fatal crash." The story detailed Midwest freight safety violations and mentioned that the victim's family was seeking significant compensation for wrongful death and ongoing medical expenses. David was particularly interested in the article's publication date, so they called you 3 days after this story ran, expressing sudden concern about your financial management capabilities. The timing is remarkably coincidental. It's not coincidental at all, I replied bitterly. They didn't care about Emma's welfare when she was fighting for her life, but they're deeply concerned about her inheritance now that it might be worth millions. We also gathered evidence about my professional qualifications and financial management history. My supervisor, Jennifer, provided documentation of my 6 years of successful employment as an accountant, including client testimonials and performance reviews that demonstrated my competence with financial planning and analysis. Your family's argument that you're unqualified to manage significant assets is particularly ironic, David observed while reviewing my employment records. You're literally a professional accountant with an excellent work history and no financial problems or bankruptcy filings. The most emotionally difficult evidence to compile was the social media documentation of Tyler's birthday celebration. David's investigator had gathered screenshots of posts from the weekend of the accident, showing my family enjoying elaborate party festivities while I sat alone in a hospital corridor mourning my husband's death. One particularly painful post showed Tyler raising a champagne toast at 11:30 p.m. on the night Marcus died, just 2 hours after I'd called begging for support. The caption read, "Best birthday celebration ever. Thanks to Mom and Dad for making this night absolutely perfect." Emma helped me organize some of the evidence, though I was careful to shield her from the most hurtful details. She was particularly interested in the hospital visitor logs, studying the names of people who had come to see her during her recovery. "Look, Mommy," she said, pointing to entries from Jake Morrison's crew. "Mr. Jake visited me 5 times, and I don't even remember because I was sleeping. But Grandma and Grandpa never came once." Her matter-of-fact observation captured the essential truth that all our legal documentation was designed to establish. When Emma needed her extended family, most strangers had shown more compassion and loyalty than her own grandparents and uncle. By Friday evening, David and I had assembled a comprehensive file that told an unmistakable story about character, priorities, and fitness for decision-making authority over Emma's settlement. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew that presenting it would require confronting my family with truths they had spent months trying to ignore or rationalize. "Are you prepared for how ugly this might get?" David asked as we concluded our final preparation meeting. When families fight over money, especially significant amounts, they often say and do things that permanently destroy relationships. I looked at the stack of evidence documenting my family's abandonment and opportunism, then thought about Emma's simple question about whether they would be nice to us this time. The relationship damage had already been done by their choices, not by my decision to defend Emma's interests. The relationship was destroyed when they chose a birthday party over their granddaughter's life, I replied. I'm just making sure everyone understands what actually happened. While organizing Marcus's belongings to make room for Emma's growing collection of rehabilitation equipment, I discovered his phone in the pocket of the jacket he'd been wearing the day of the accident. The police had returned his personal effects weeks earlier, but I'd been too emotionally overwhelmed to examine them closely. Now, 3 months after his death, I finally felt strong enough to look through his final photos and messages. Emma was having a good day with minimal headaches, so she helped me sort through Marcus's work clothes and personal items. We were turning the task into a celebration of his memory, rather than a painful reminder of loss. Emma had developed a healthy curiosity about her father's life and wanted to understand who he was through his belongings. "What's in Daddy's phone?" Emma asked as I held the device with trembling hands. "Can we see pictures of when he was little like me?" I powered on the phone, surprised that it still held a charge after sitting unused for so long. The lock screen displayed a photo of Emma and Marcus at her last soccer game, both grinning widely with grass stains on their clothes and victory written across their faces. As I scrolled through his photo gallery, I found hundreds of pictures documenting our family life in ways I'd never fully appreciated. Marcus had photographed Emma's artwork from school, my attempts at new recipes, and countless candid moments that captured the joy we'd shared as a family. Then I found the photos that would change everything. The final images in Marcus's camera roll were taken on October 15th, the day of the accident. They showed Marcus and Emma at Peterson's ice cream parlor, a small shop near Emma's soccer field where they'd stopped after her practice. Emma was leaning across the table laughing at something Marcus had said while he made exaggerated faces to amuse her. But it was the timestamp that made my blood run cold. The last photo was taken at 9:37 p.m., exactly 8 minutes before I'd called my parents from the hospital corridor. Marcus and Emma had been sharing ice cream sundaes and making silly faces just moments before the truck ran the red light and destroyed our lives forever. Emma peered over my shoulder at the screen, delighted to see herself with her father during what had been their final happy moment together. I remember that Daddy let me get extra hot fudge, and he said I could stay up late because it was a special day. I stared at the photo through tears, realizing that my parents had been enjoying Tyler's birthday celebration at the exact moment their son-in-law and granddaughter were sharing their last conversation. While Marcus was making Emma laugh and creating final memories, my family was raising toasts to another year of Tyler's life. The contrast was devastating and undeniable. Continuing through Marcus's belongings, I found something even more powerful tucked inside his work folder. It was a handwritten letter addressed to Emma, apparently written during a lunch break several weeks before the accident. Marcus's neat handwriting covered 3 pages of notebook paper, and the content revealed his deep love for our family and his gratitude for the life we'd built together. My beautiful Emma, the letter began, "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and I want you to know how much joy you brought to every single day of my life. You made me proud to be your daddy with your kindness, your curiosity, and your determination to help everyone around you feel happy." He wrote about specific memories they'd shared, from teaching her to ride a bicycle to helping with science projects that usually ended up covering the kitchen table with glue and construction paper. He described my strength as a mother and wife, noting that I was the smartest and most capable person he'd ever known. "Your mommy is the strongest woman in the world," Marcus had written. "She can handle anything life throws at her because she has a heart full of love and a mind full of wisdom. If something happens to me, I know she'll take care of you better than anyone else could, and I want you to listen to her advice because she always knows what's best for our family." The final paragraph addressed financial concerns with remarkable prescience. "Emma, if there's ever money involved because of my death, remember that your mommy is smart about finances and business. Don't let anyone tell you that she needs help making decisions about your future. She knows what our family needs better than anyone else in the world, and I trust her completely to take care of you." Reading Marcus's words felt like receiving a message from beyond the grave, specifically addressing the exact situation my family was trying to create. His letter provided not only emotional validation, but also legal evidence of his trust in my decision-making capabilities and his clear intention that I should have full authority over Emma's care and financial needs. Emma listened carefully as I read portions of the letter aloud, editing out references to Marcus's death while preserving his expressions of love and pride. She was particularly moved by his descriptions of their special activities and shared jokes. "Daddy really did think I was smart," Emma said with satisfaction, "and he thought you were the strongest woman in the world. That's what I think too." I photographed both the letter and the final phone pictures, recognizing their potential importance as evidence in any legal proceedings my family might initiate. The timestamps would prove that my parents were celebrating Tyler's birthday during the exact minutes when Marcus and Emma were creating their last memory together. More importantly, Marcus's letter provided his explicit endorsement of my ability to manage Emma's future without external oversight. His words carried the weight of a father's final wishes and demonstrated his complete confidence in my competence and judgment. That evening, I called David Chen to describe the discoveries and their potential legal significance. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Jean, this evidence is incredibly powerful. The photo timestamps create an irrefutable timeline that exposes your family's priorities, and Marcus's letter essentially serves as a will expressing his trust in your financial and parenting capabilities. Can we use these in court if they pursue their trust proposal?" I asked. Absolutely. In fact, I think we should share them proactively. Sometimes the most effective legal strategy is to demonstrate the weakness of your opponent's position before they can fully develop their argument. David suggested arranging one final family meeting where we could present this evidence and give my parents an opportunity to abandon their legal threats before formal court proceedings began. The approach would allow them to save face while protecting Emma from prolonged legal battles. Let them see exactly how their behavior looks when it's documented with dates, times, and photographic evidence, David advised. Sometimes people need to confront the full truth about their actions before they can make better choices going forward. I agreed to David's strategy, though I suspected my family's response would depend entirely on how much money they thought they could gain through continued legal pressure. Marcus's letter and photos had given me powerful ammunition, but I'd learned not to underestimate my relatives' capacity for rationalization when financial opportunities were at stake. Emma helped me frame one of the final photos of her and Marcus, and we placed it on the mantle next to her school pictures and artwork. Looking at their happy faces, I felt Marcus's presence in our preparations for whatever confrontation lay ahead. His love for Emma and trust in me would guide every decision I made about protecting our daughter's future from people who had already demonstrated their inability to prioritize her welfare over their own convenience. David Chen's call came on a crisp December morning while Emma and I were decorating our Christmas tree with ornaments Marcus had collected during his travels for construction projects. Emma was carefully hanging a small wooden Santa that Marcus had bought in Vermont, explaining to the ornament that her daddy had picked it out especially for her. "Jean, I have news about the settlement," David said, his voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard before. "Midwest Freight's insurance company has agreed to our demand for $2.7 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. Emma and I had lived paycheck to paycheck for our entire marriage, celebrating when we managed to save enough for a modest vacation or appliance replacement. The idea of having nearly $3 million felt surreal and overwhelming." "Well, what exactly does that mean for Emma's care?" I asked, trying to focus on practical implications rather than the staggering amount. "It means Emma's medical needs will be covered for life, including any ongoing therapy-specialized education or future treatments related to her head injury. You'll also be able to provide her with opportunities that Marcus dreamed about but couldn't afford on a construction worker's salary." David explained the settlement structure, which included provisions for Emma's education, medical care, and general support until she reached adulthood, with the remaining funds invested in trust accounts that would provide lifetime financial security. The arrangement was designed to ensure that Emma would never face financial hardship while preventing any single person from accessing large amounts of money inappropriately. "When will the settlement be finalized?" I asked. "The paperwork should be completed within 2 weeks. Midwest Freight wants this resolved quickly to avoid additional publicity about their safety violations. The company is also facing federal investigations that could result in criminal charges against their executives." That afternoon, I received 3 phone calls that demonstrated how quickly news traveled in small communities. My mother called first, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and carefully rehearsed concern about Emma's welfare. Tyler called an hour later, suggesting that the family should celebrate this wonderful news together with a special dinner. Robert's call came just before Emma's bedtime, emphasizing his desire to help me make responsible decisions about such significant financial responsibilities. None of them expressed genuine joy about Emma's security or relief that her medical needs would be met. Their focus remained fixed on the money itself and their perceived right to influence how it would be managed. Sandra Williams called the following morning, informing me that my parents were prepared to file formal legal action if I didn't agree to their proposed trust arrangement. Her tone suggested that she viewed this as an inevitable business transaction rather than a family dispute involving a traumatized child. "Mrs. Anderson, your parents are prepared to petition the court for a competency hearing regarding your ability to manage significant assets while grieving your husband's death. These proceedings can become quite expensive and emotionally draining for everyone involved." "Are you threatening me, Ms. Williams?" I asked directly. "I'm explaining the legal realities. Family courts take very seriously their responsibility to protect children's financial interests, especially when substantial settlements are involved. Having family oversight can actually prevent court intervention." I ended the conversation by informing Sandra that any future communications needed to go through my attorney. The escalation was happening exactly as David had predicted, but the timing felt particularly cruel given that we were approaching Emma's first Christmas without her father. Emma had been listening to my side of these conversations with growing confusion and anxiety. Finally, she asked the question that cut through all the legal complexity. "Mommy, why do they want our money so bad? Don't they have their own money?" I knelt down to Emma's eye level and tried to explain adult greed in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Some people think that when families get money, it should be shared with everyone, even if they didn't help earn it or need it for important things like medical care. "But we need it for my therapy and your job and our house," Emma pointed out logically. "They have jobs and houses already." Her simple assessment captured the essential truth that my family's legal arguments were designed to obscure. Emma's settlement was compensation for trauma and loss, not a windfall to be distributed among relatives who had contributed nothing to her recovery or well-being. That evening, I made a decision that would determine the course of our future relationship with my family. I called David and asked him to arrange one final meeting where we could present our evidence and give my parents a clear choice about how to proceed. "I want them to see exactly what their behavior looks like when it's documented and presented objectively," I told David. "They can choose to maintain their legal threats, but they need to understand what they're actually demanding and what evidence exists about their character and priorities." David agreed to facilitate the meeting, suggesting that we use his conference room to maintain a professional atmosphere that would discourage emotional outbursts or manipulation tactics. "Bring the photos, Marcus's letter, and all the documentation we've assembled," David advised. "Let them see the full picture of their abandonment contrasted with your competent handling of this crisis. Sometimes people need to confront uncomfortable truths before they can make better choices." I spent the weekend preparing for what I knew would likely be the final conversation with my parents about their role in Emma's life. The evidence we'd gathered painted such a damning picture of their priorities that I couldn't imagine them continuing their legal threats once they understood how their behavior would look to a judge. But I'd learned not to underestimate my family's capacity for self-deception when money was involved. Emma helped me organize the photos and documents, treating the preparation like a school project about truth and fairness. Her innocent perspective on the situation continued to provide clarity that adult analysis often missed. "Are we going to show them the picture of me and Daddy being happy?" Emma asked. "Because maybe if they see how much he loved me, they'll understand why he wanted you to take care of our money." Her hope that visual evidence of love might change hardened hearts was both touching and naive. But I agreed that Marcus's final photos deserved to be part of any discussion about Emma's future, regardless of whether my family was capable of understanding their significance. The conference room at David Chen's law office felt like a courtroom as my parents, Tyler and Sandra Williams, arranged themselves on one side of the polished table while Emma and I sat across from them with our evidence carefully organized in manila folders. David had insisted that Emma be present for this meeting, arguing that any decisions about her future should include her voice and perspective. Emma wore her best dress and sat quietly beside me, her hands folded in her lap as she observed the adults who were fighting over money meant to secure her future. She'd requested to bring one of Marcus's construction helmets, which now sat on the table like a silent reminder of who this meeting was really supposed to honor. Before we begin discussions about trust arrangements, David announced, "My client would like to present some evidence that might inform everyone's understanding of the family dynamics involved in this case." I opened the first folder and removed the hospital visitor logs from Emma's stay in the pediatric intensive care unit. The pages showed detailed records of every person who had come to see Emma during her 6 days of unconsciousness, along with dates, times, and relationship information. "These are the official visitor records from Emma's hospitalization," I said, sliding the documents across the table. "As you can see, Marcus's co-workers visited multiple times, along with teachers, neighbors, and even the grocery store clerk from our neighborhood. Emma's grandparents and uncle are not listed anywhere." Carol leaned forward to study the logs, her face reddening as she recognized names of people who had shown more concern for Emma's welfare than she had. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Tyler maintained his characteristic expression of bored indifference. "Hospital visits aren't really relevant to financial management capabilities," Sandra interjected quickly. "Actually, they're very relevant to determining who has Emma's best interests at heart," David replied smoothly. "But let's continue with the timeline." I opened the second folder and produced the funeral guest book from Marcus's service, along with photographs showing the empty family section that had been reserved for my parents and brother. The contrast with the packed church was visually striking and emotionally devastating. "These photos were taken at my husband's funeral," I explained. "The front 3 rows were reserved for immediate family members who never arrived. Behind those empty seats, you can see neighbors, co-workers, teachers, and community members who took time off work to support a grieving widow and orphaned child." Emma pointed to one of the photos and spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "That's Mr. Jake, who worked with Daddy. He was crying because he missed Daddy too. And that's my teacher, Mrs. Williams, who brought me homework so I wouldn't fall behind in school." Her innocent observations provided commentary that no adult argument could refute. An 8-year-old could clearly see the difference between people who cared about her welfare and people who prioritized their own convenience. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, we explained about the timing conflicts. People have responsibilities and commitments that can't always be changed." "Speaking of timing," I said, opening the third folder to reveal Marcus's phone and the final photographs it contained. "These are the last pictures my husband took before the accident." I placed printouts of the ice cream shop photos on the table, making sure everyone could see the timestamps clearly displayed in the corners. Emma leaned forward eagerly, always happy to see pictures of her final moments with her father. These photos were taken at 9:37 p.m. on October 15th. I continued. Marcus and Emma were sharing ice cream after her soccer practice, completely unaware that a truck with faulty brakes was about to destroy our family. I paused to let the timing sink in before delivering the crushing revelation. I called you at 9:45 p.m. that night, 8 minutes after this last photo was taken. While Marcus and Emma were creating their final memory together, you were celebrating Tyler's birthday party. When I called begging for support during the worst moment of my life, you were toasting another year of my brother's existence. The silence in the room was profound and uncomfortable. Carol stared at the photos with dawning recognition of what her absence had really meant, while Robert studied the timestamps, as if hoping they might somehow change upon closer examination. Emma picked up one of the photos and smiled sadly. This was when Daddy let me get extra hot fudge. He said special days deserved special treats, but he didn't know it was going to be our last special day together. Tyler cleared his throat aggressively. Okay, so the timing was unfortunate, but that doesn't change the fact that Emma needs proper financial oversight for her settlement. I opened the final folder and removed Marcos's handwritten letter, the pages slightly worn from repeated reading, but the words still clear and powerful. This is a letter Marcus wrote to Emma several weeks before the accident. I'd like to read the relevant portion. I found the paragraph that directly addressed the current situation and read Marcus's words aloud in the quiet conference room. Emma, if there's ever money involved because of my death, remember that your mommy is smart about finances and business. Don't let anyone tell you that she needs help making decisions about your future. She knows what our family needs better than anyone else in the world, and I trust her completely to take care of you. The impact of Marcus's words was immediate and devastating. My parents' entire argument was based on the premise that I needed external guidance to manage Emma's settlement responsibly. Marcus had specifically anticipated and rejected that argument in his own handwriting. Sandra Williams looked visibly uncomfortable as she realized that her client's case had just collapsed. Personal letters don't necessarily reflect legal realities about fiduciary responsibilities, she said weakly. Emma stood up and walked around the table to retrieve her father's construction helmet. She held it carefully in both hands and addressed the adults who had been discussing her future as if she weren't present. This was Daddy's helmet that kept him safe at work every day, Emma said with 8-year-old solemnity. He always said the most important thing was keeping families together and taking care of people you love. But when our family needed you to take care of us, you went to a party instead. Her simple statement contained more wisdom and moral clarity than hours of legal arguments could provide. She returned to her seat beside me, still holding Marcus's helmet like a talisman of protection. Robert attempted one final argument. Jean, regardless of past mistakes, the reality is that Emma's inheritance requires sophisticated financial management. We're offering to help ensure her future security. Oh, her settlement, I corrected firmly, and her father's explicit wishes were that I handle all financial decisions without external interference. Are you suggesting that you know better than Marcus what would be best for his own daughter? The question hung in the air like an accusation, because that's exactly what they were suggesting. They were demanding legal authority over money that Marcus had died to provide in direct contradiction to his stated trust in my capabilities. David Chen leaned forward to deliver the final blow. Based on the evidence presented today, any court petition questioning Mrs. Anderson's fitness for financial guardianship would be not only unsuccessful, but potentially viewed as harassment of a grieving family. The documented abandonment during crisis combined with the deceased father's explicit trust in his wife's judgment creates an insurmountable legal obstacle to external oversight. Sandra Williams began gathering her papers with the efficiency of someone retreating from an untenable position. Perhaps we should all take some time to reconsider our positions before making any formal legal filings. Carol finally spoke, her voice small and defeated. We never meant for things to get so complicated. We just thought. You just thought there was easy money to be claimed, I finished. But this isn't easy money. This is compensation for the worst thing that ever happened to our family, and every dollar represents a piece of the life Marcus can't share with Emma. As the meeting concluded, my parents left without scheduling any future contact or expressing any interest in rebuilding their relationship with Emma. Tyler departed with characteristic indifference, apparently unbothered by the evidence of his callousness during our family's darkest hour. Emma and I walked to David's office window and looked down at the parking lot where my family was having what appeared to be a heated discussion beside their cars. Sandra Williams drove away, first followed quickly by Tyler's pickup truck. "Are they going to leave us alone now?" Emma asked. "I think so, sweetheart. They understand now that they can't take money that belongs to us." Emma nodded thoughtfully while still holding her father's helmet. "Good, because Daddy wanted you to take care of me, and you're doing a really good job." Her simple endorsement meant more than any legal victory could provide. Within 48 hours of our conference room confrontation, Sandra Williams called David Chen to formally withdraw any potential legal action regarding Emma's settlement. Her brief conversation confirmed what had been obvious during the meeting: my family's case lacked both legal merit and factual support that would survive judicial scrutiny. My clients have decided to respect Mrs. Anderson's authority over her daughter's financial arrangements. Sandra reported to David, her professional tone barely concealing what must have been embarrassment about the frivolous nature of their original threats. David's response was diplomatic but firm. "We appreciate your client's decision to prioritize Emma's welfare over their personal financial interests. We trust this concludes any external oversight discussions regarding the settlement." But the consequences of my family's behavior extended far beyond our private legal maneuvering. Small communities have long memories for moral failures, and their abandonment of Emma during her medical crisis had become widely known through the network of people who had actually provided support during our ordeal. Jake Morrison and his construction crew made no effort to hide their disgust when they learned about my parents' financial demands. During their regular coffee breaks at Murphy's Diner, they shared the story with other contractors, business owners, and community members who had witnessed Marcus's dedication to his family and work. "Can you believe those people?" I overheard Jake telling the diner owner during one of Emma's therapy appointments. "They couldn't be bothered to visit their granddaughter in the hospital, but they wanted half the money from their son-in-law's death. Makes me sick to think about it." The story spread through interconnected social circles with the speed that only genuine outrage can generate. Emma's teacher, Sarah Williams, mentioned the situation to other faculty members at Lincoln Elementary, who shared it with parents during school events and community activities. Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor who had organized meal deliveries during Emma's recovery, discussed my family's behavior at her book club meetings, church gatherings, and weekly grocery shopping trips. Her moral indignation was particularly powerful because she had witnessed firsthand both our isolation during the crisis and my parents' sudden interest once money entered the picture. The social consequences were swift and severe. Carol and Robert discovered that their country club membership had become a source of uncomfortable conversations rather than social prestige. Other members remembered attending Tyler's birthday celebration and now understood that they had been unwitting participants in an event that prioritized personal entertainment over family emergency. Margaret Thornton, the club's social committee chairwoman and a mother of 4, confronted Carol directly during a holiday luncheon. "Carol, I had no idea you were celebrating Tyler's birthday while your daughter was burying her husband alone. If we'd known about the tragedy, we would have canceled our attendance and encouraged you to be with your family." The rebuke was delivered with southern politeness but unmistakable moral judgment. Other club members began treating my parents with cool formality rather than the warm friendship they had cultivated over years of social climbing and community involvement. Tyler faced professional consequences when his supervisor at the regional sales company learned about his behavior during our family crisis. Several clients had heard the story through community connections and expressed concern about doing business with someone who demonstrated such callous disregard for family obligations during emergencies. Tyler, we've received some troubling feedback about your personal conduct, his supervisor explained during what became a formal disciplinary meeting. Our company values reflect integrity and community responsibility. Your behavior during your sister's tragedy raises serious questions about your character and judgment. Tyler's sales territory was reduced, and he was removed from high-profile client accounts where his reputation might damage business relationships. The professional consequences were particularly painful because Tyler had always prided himself on his career success and social connections. The most satisfying justice came through completely unexpected channels. Harold Thompson, the cemetery director who had commented on my family's absence from Marcus's funeral, served on the board of directors for the local Chamber of Commerce. He shared the story during a board meeting focused on recognizing businesses and individuals who exemplified community values. We talk about supporting families during difficult times, Harold observed, but I witnessed a situation recently that showed the difference between genuine community support and mere social convenience. A young widow buried her husband with help from his coworkers and neighbors, while her own parents were too busy with a birthday party to attend. The story resonated with business leaders who understood that community reputation directly affected professional opportunities. Several board members canceled or reconsidered business relationships with companies that employed my family members or provided services to their social activities. Emma observed these social consequences with the clear-eyed assessment that head injury survivors often develop about human behavior. People don't like Grandma and Grandpa anymore because they were mean to us, she noted matter-of-factly after overhearing conversations at her therapy appointments. People understand the difference between right and wrong, I explained. When someone chooses parties over helping family members who are hurting, it shows what kind of person they really are. David Chen received one final call from Sandra Williams this time, requesting that we not pursue harassment charges against her for threatening frivolous litigation. Her concern suggested that my family had finally grasped the legal and social consequences of their behavior. We declined to file formal charges, David informed Sandra, provided that your former clients make no further contact with Mrs. Anderson or her daughter regarding financial matters. Any future communication should be limited to genuine family relationships that prioritize Emma's emotional welfare over monetary considerations. 3 weeks before Christmas, my parents made one last attempt at reconciliation through Jennifer Walsh, my supervisor who attended the same church as my mother. Carol had approached Jennifer after services, tearfully explaining that she'd made terrible mistakes and wanted to rebuild her relationship with Emma. Jennifer called me privately to relay the conversation. Your mother seemed genuinely remorseful, John, but she also kept mentioning how much money Emma will have and how important it is for grandparents to be involved in major decisions. I'm not sure her motivation has really changed. I thanked Jennifer for the information, but made no effort to contact my parents. Emma's emotional healing was progressing steadily, and I saw no benefit in exposing her to people who continued to view her settlement as their opportunity rather than her security. Emma had learned to recognize genuine concern versus self-interested manipulation with the clarity that only children possess. When I asked if she wanted to see her grandparents for Christmas, her response was immediate and definitive. No, thank you, Mommy. I want to spend Christmas with people who love me even when I don't have money. Her wisdom guided my decision about future family relationships. 6 months after Marcus's death, Emma and I moved into our new home in Riverside Heights, a quiet neighborhood with excellent schools and a strong sense of community. The house was modest by settlement standards, but it featured everything we needed to build a secure future: a dedicated therapy room for Emma's ongoing rehabilitation, a home office where I could work flexible hours, and a backyard garden where we planted flowers in Marcus's memory. The settlement had been finalized without further family interference, providing Emma with financial security that would last her entire lifetime. More importantly, it allowed us to focus on healing and growth rather than survival and crisis management. Emma's recovery exceeded all medical predictions, and she returned to full-time school with only minor accommodations for occasional headaches and fatigue. I established the Marcus Anderson Memorial Scholarship at Emma's new elementary school, providing annual awards for children who demonstrated kindness and perseverance in the face of difficult circumstances. The scholarship honored Marcus's belief that character mattered more than achievement, and that communities grew stronger when people supported each other during challenging times. Emma participated in selecting scholarship recipients, interviewing young candidates with a maturity that amazed teachers and parents. Her questions focused on how applicants helped others and handled disappointment, reflecting the life lessons she'd learned through tragedy and recovery. "I want to give scholarships to kids who are nice to people even when it's hard," Emma explained to the selection committee, "because Daddy always said the most important thing was being kind, especially when other people aren't being kind to you." Jake Morrison and his construction crew remained active parts of our extended family, attending Emma's school events and helping with household projects that required professional expertise. Jake had become a surrogate grandfather figure, teaching Emma about tools and construction while sharing stories about her father's work ethic and sense of humor. "Your daddy was the kind of man who made everyone around him better," Jake told Emma during one of his regular visits. "He'd be proud of how strong and smart you've become and how well your mommy has taken care of you both." Emma's teacher, Sarah Williams, continued providing educational support and friendship that had begun during our hospital crisis. She helped Emma process her grief through art therapy projects and writing assignments that celebrated Marcus's memory while acknowledging the pain of his absence. Patricia Gonzalez, the hospital social worker who had recognized our isolation during Emma's treatment, became a close friend who provided perspective on our healing journey. She often remarked that our transformation from crisis to stability demonstrated remarkable resilience and the power of choosing positive relationships over toxic family obligations. "You've created a beautiful life for Emma built on genuine connections rather than obligatory relationships," Patricia observed during one of our regular coffee meetings. "She's learned that family isn't always about blood ties, but about people who show up when you need them most." Our chosen family expanded to include neighbors, teachers, medical professionals, and friends who had proven their loyalty during our darkest period. Emma's birthday parties and holiday celebrations were filled with people who genuinely cared about her welfare rather than attendees who felt obligated by genetics or social expectations. My parents made sporadic attempts to reestablish contact, usually around holidays or Emma's birthday, but their outreach always included subtle references to financial decisions or major purchases that required family input. Their inability to separate genuine relationship building from money management confirmed that their priorities remained unchanged. Tyler sent Emma a birthday card with a $50 gift certificate and a note suggesting that they should get together soon to discuss her college planning. At age 9, Emma was sophisticated enough to recognize the manipulation behind presents that came with strings attached. "I don't need Uncle Tyler to help plan my college," Emma informed me after reading his card. "He didn't help when I was sick, so he doesn't get to help when I'm doing good things." Her clarity about appropriate boundaries protected us both from people who wanted to claim credit for our success without having supported us through our struggles. Emma had learned to value authenticity over obligation, a lesson that would serve her well throughout life. I returned to full-time work at Henderson Associates, where Jennifer Walsh had promoted me to senior associate with responsibilities that included financial planning for other families facing unexpected tragedies. My experience with settlement management and single parenthood provided valuable perspective for clients navigating similar challenges. The work felt meaningful in ways that extended beyond professional achievement. I could help other families avoid the isolation we'd experienced and connect them with resources and support networks that prioritize genuine assistance over opportunistic involvement. Emma's physical recovery was virtually complete, with only occasional headaches that decreased in frequency and intensity over time. Her cognitive abilities had fully returned and she excelled academically while maintaining the emotional intelligence that had developed through processing trauma and loss. Dr. Rebecca Henderson. Emma's therapist noted during our final session that Emma had achieved remarkable psychological stability despite experiencing profound loss at a young age. Emma understands that bad things sometimes happen to good people, but she also knows that there are always people willing to help if you let them. That's a sophisticated understanding of life that many adults never develop. On the first anniversary of Marcus's death, Emma and I visited his grave with flowers from our memorial garden and letters we'd written describing our new life. Emma's letter included drawings of our house, her new friends, and the scholarship recipients who would benefit from her father's memory. "I think Daddy would be happy about our new life," Emma said as we arranged fresh flowers on his headstone. "We have nice people who care about us, and we help other kids who are sad like we were sad." Standing in that peaceful cemetery surrounded by evidence of the meaningful life we'd built from tragedy, I reflected on the lessons we'd learned about the nature of family loyalty and love. Blood relationships had failed us when we needed them most, but chosen family had provided the foundation for our recovery and future happiness. Emma's settlement would ensure her financial security, but the relationships we'd cultivated would provide the emotional support that money could never purchase. She would grow up understanding that genuine love required action, not just words, and that character revealed itself most clearly during difficult circumstances. As we walked back to our car, Emma asked a question that had become her standard way of processing life's complexities. "Mommy, do you think other kids learn about families the same way we did?" Some do," I replied honestly, "but most kids are lucky enough to have families who put love before money and who show up when help is needed most." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad we learned it even though it was sad. Now we know the difference between people who really love us and people who just pretend to love us." Her wisdom continued to amaze and humble me. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at our kitchen table and I prepared dinner in our new home, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful from the wreckage of tragedy. We had not just survived our loss, we had created a life that honored Marcus's memory while providing Emma with security, love, and hope for the future. The settlement money would always represent the price of Marcus's life, but the relationships we'd built represented the true wealth that sustained our daily happiness. Emma would grow up rich in both financial resources and human connections that valued her character over her circumstances. Before bedtime, Emma and I sat together in our living room, looking through photo albums that documented our journey from crisis to stability. The pictures showed her progression from hospital patient to scholarship founder, and my transformation from isolated widow to community leader. "We made something good happen from something really bad," Emma observed with a profound simplicity that characterized her worldview. "Yes, we did," I agreed, "and your daddy would be proud of both of us." As I tucked Emma into bed, she asked one final question that revealed how completely she had processed our experience. "Mommy, if something sad happens to other families, like what happened to us, will we help them the way Mr. Jake and Mrs. Williams helped us?" "Absolutely," I promised, "because that's what good families do for each other." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that she was part of a family defined by love rather than genetic support, rather than obligation, and character rather than convenience. Our story had become one of transformation rather than tragedy, proving that the worst circumstances could generate the most meaningful growth when faced with courage, wisdom, and the support of people who genuinely cared about our welfare. In building our new life, we had discovered that the most important inheritance we could provide for Emma wasn't financial security, but the understanding that true family consists of people who choose to love you unconditionally and stand with you through every challenge life presents. What experiences have shaped your understanding of what family really means? Have you ever had to choose between blood relatives and people who actually support you during difficult times? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for sharing this journey with Emma and me. Your support and engagement mean everything to families who are rebuilding their lives after tragedy. Please like this video if our story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life experiences about resilience and recovery, and share our story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that chosen family can be stronger than biological connections. Remember that the most valuable relationships in life are built on actions, not obligations, and that genuine love always shows up when it matters most. Take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter to you.